Imagine, it's your freshman year of college and it's your first time ever taking finals. But you can't focus on studying or anything to do with these classes because you're binge watching the show Game of Thrones. This was me just last year, and I'm gonna tell you my story. The first 3 points I would like to go over is, first of all, why I was into this show in the first place and the book series that goes along with it. Also, what draws me and so many other people into this show. And lastly, why it continues to be one of my favorite shows ever, even months after it's aired. Really, you guys should care about this because it's one of HBO's biggest shows ever, and not only one of HBO's, but one of the world's biggest shows ever. Even if you haven't seen the show or follow it, you definitely have heard about it almost. I have seen this show about 7 times all the way through. I know a lot about it, and I think that gives me the credibility to give this speech. So, my first point is how I got into this book series and the show in the first place. When I was in high school, it was sophomore year, I heard these people talking about a show with unicorns and dragons and knights and all that stuff. And I really didn't have a lot of interest in it at first. I had heard of it though. The show is called Game of Thrones. Shocker. Now, when I thought about this more, I thought it might be an interesting thing to look at. So I decided to check it out just because of its popularity. And I think that's another reason why a lot of people have gotten to see this show, is because you hear about it and then you check it out and give it a chance, and it will blow you away, just as it did me. Now, when I first got into the show, I didn't know that there was a book series involved. And I really changed my perspective when I found out there was. I felt like to properly know this show and understand it, I should read the books. So in high school, I ended up reading 3 of the books. There are 5 in the series so far, and the series of books hasn't ended yet. And I really feel like I got a deeper appreciation and understanding of the whole story as an entire thing. But it also made me look at the show in a different way, because the show and the books, they differ and they go on different paths, and it's actually a big point of contestation between a lot of the fans for people that think the books are the better or the shows are better, and the decisions made by the showrunners are not the best maybe all the time. Now, this kind of brings me to my second point, which is what draws so many people into the show. This show is incredibly popular, so there has to be a reason why people can transcend show genres of things that they would normally like or normally look at and watch this show because it's pretty magnetic. I think personally that it's because under all the fantasy layers, we have characters that are really grounded. Of course, all of us want to live in a world where we can be in castles and be treated like prince and kings. But the show also has a sense of showing people what it's really like to live in deep poverty, especially in these times that are not necessarily specified, but definitely give you a sense of the world as a whole. Now, in this show, I think that a couple characters that are really central to the show and important for its popularity are Daenerys Targaryen, of course. If you've heard of the show Game of Thrones, there is a good chance that you've heard of Daenerys Targaryen. She's probably one of the most popular people on the show. And this is because she has such a huge and central storyline to the show, but also because she's treated like a fantasy character, which is really good for the publicity of the show. So if they want to get things out there, they can show a woman with white hair who's riding a dragon, and it's a great advertising mechanism. Now, this kind of brings me to my last point, which is why it continues to be mine and so many other people's favorite show, even after it's ended. Now, I really believe that this show had a really strong beginning because of the books. When the books end and the show doesn't have anything to base its story off of anymore, a lot of people think that it declines. And this is because the books were the original baseline for the show. And so of course it's going to change when they go away. But the show is still incredibly popular and even growing in popularity after the books ended, which is around season 5. Now, as these seasons went on, they did become less popular. And it leads us to the final season, which was the most controversial season, undoubtedly. It really split Game of Thrones fans apart and caused a lot of people to not even like the show anymore. Now, I understand this, and I felt this frustration too, as did a lot of fans around the world, but I personally believe that it doesn't take away from the overall storyline that we've created, and I think we can still take the show as an incredible show for what it had built up, even before we got to the last season where things kind of took a turn for the worse. Now, I will always think that this show is incredible and important to our world, and I think that's because they really have a great, important, and steady base that they set up. They just have really good writers, stories, and actors, and when it all comes together, it comes to create a really great form of entertainment that people really do bond over. It's created so many friendships, so many relationships that could have never happened, and just it really connects people from worlds away because it is a story about everyone. Now, in this speech, I first went over why I got into these books and the show in the first place. The second thing I went over was what draws me and so many other people to this show. And the last thing I talked about was why it continues to be my favorite show despite controversy and despite it being ended months ago. This show, I think, will always be important to people, and especially to me. It was a big part of me growing up, and I'll always have a lot of fond memories of this show, even if it maybe didn't end on the greatest note. I think it's a show that deserves to be commended by a lot of people for what it's really changed for the television landscape, especially in America. Thanks.
Ooh.